2 o'clock in the morning. Fewer than 70 Green Berets hunting one Taliban commander. Then the dark explodes machine gun fire from every direction at once, the 200 Taliban strong and closing in from all sides. 2 Green Berets drop in the open. The Taliban start moving in to take them alive. On the radio, the team's interpreter says he'll shoot both Americans himself before he lets that happen. A mile of fire away, one man hears it and reaches for the straps of his own body armor and starts taking it off. What he does next is why the enemy never reached those 2 men. This is the story of the Green Berets' most brutal hours. June 2006, Panjwai District, just southwest of Kandahar City. Special forces called it one of the most hotly contested patches of ground in the entire war, the spiritual heartland of the Taliban. A maze of mud-walled compounds, irrigation ditches, and grape-drying huts with walls thick enough to stop a rifle round. On June 23, a small element of Green Berets from the 7th Special Forces Group went in with a clear job: capture or kill the Taliban leader who had moved into the vineyards and forced every civilian out. Fewer than 10 Green Berets, a handful of other Americans, and a company of Afghan soldiers cleared the objective and set up a patrol base in the village. Then they started patrolling to find their man. What they did not know was that hundreds of well-armed, well-supplied Taliban were already in the area, dug in and waiting. American troops were used to the enemy's hit-and-run style, a few shots from a tree line, then gone before the dust settled. This was something they had not seen, a coordinated, sustained assault by a force many times their size. When the ambush opened, the team leader, Captain Sheffield Ford, later said it was like all hell breaking loose at once, fire pouring in from every direction, the enemy working them with multiple weapon systems, the small element completely encircled and trying just to identify where the shooting was coming from. A 3-man group, Staff Sergeant Matthew Binney, Staff Sergeant Joe Fewest, and an Afghan interpreter the team called Jacob, split off to lay down covering fire and walked straight into a machine gun. The burst fractured Binney's skull and shattered his shoulder. A rocket-propelled grenade slammed into Fewest's chest. It did not explode, but the impact left him down. Both men were down in the open, and the Taliban were closing in to take them alive. Jacob refused to run. The enemy shouted that they only wanted the Americans, that he could leave unharmed. He told them all right, and when they moved in, he killed them. Then he got on the radio and said something almost impossible to hear. He was prepared to shoot both wounded Americans and then himself rather than let any of them be captured. His captain told him to hold on. Help was coming. That help was the team's senior medic, Brendan O'Connor. To reach the wounded, he had to cross an open field being raked by machine gun fire. So he made a decision the men watching could not believe. He took off his body armor, said it slowed him down, and low-crawled roughly 90 yards through a ditch as rounds clipped the grass inches above his back. He reached Binney and Fewest, treated them under fire, then carried one of them across open ground to cover. The fight dragged past 17 hours. Apache gunships rolled in overhead, but the Taliban still had the team boxed in. To break out in the dark, a pilot guided them with an infrared beam visible only through night vision goggles, and O'Connor led the survivors hundreds of meters through enemy positions, following that invisible line while the gunships destroyed anything that strayed from it. When it was over, the team had held, but Master Sergeant Thomas Mahalik was dead, and so was another soldier. O'Connor received the Distinguished Service Cross, the nation's second highest award for valor. It was one of the most decorated Special Forces actions of the entire war. They had crawled out of one trap, but the next mission would put a team on the side of a frozen mountain with a warlord waiting above them and nowhere to hide. April 6, 2008, Nuristan Province. The target this time had a name that mattered all the way up the chain: Gulbuddin Hekmatyar, the leader of Hezb-e Islami Gulbuddin, a warlord whose network was tied tightly to the Taliban. Intelligence said his fighters were massing in the Shok Valley, a remote slash of Nuristan at 10,000 feet that no American had ever fought in. Operational Detachment Alpha 3336 of the 3rd Special Forces Group, with their Afghan commando partners, lifted off before dawn to capture him. Nothing went to plan. The terrain was so jagged and the cliffs so sheer that the CH-47 Chinooks could not land. The men had to jump roughly 10 feet from the hovering ramps, some onto rock, some into a fast, freezing river running through the valley floor. Above them sat hundreds of compounds the imagery had never shown, terraced into the mountainside like a fortress, and the enemy held every inch of the high ground. The valley was eerily quiet, and then it detonated. The opening salvo killed the team's interpreter instantly and hit nearly everyone in the lead element. Within minutes, the assault force was pinned against a 100-foot cliff, fighting for survival. The enemy held the high ground on three sides, firing down with machine guns and rocket-propelled grenades into a stack of men with almost nowhere to hide. The commander, then Captain Kyle Walton, would later say they were forced to call close air support down almost directly on top of their own positions, just to keep from being overrun bombs landing close enough that the shockwaves rolled over his own men. What those men did on that rock face became legend. The medic, Staff Sergeant Ronald Schurer, fought his way up to the wounded and then worked on casualty after casualty under direct fire for hours, plugging gunshot wounds, keeping critically injured men alive, and then helping lower each of them down a sheer cliff face one at a time while rounds cracked off the rock around him. The team's weapons sergeant, Staff Sergeant Matthew Williams, saw the lead element cut off and made a decision. He gathered a group of Afghan commandos and led a counterattack straight back across the kill zone to reach them, then climbed that exposed cliff again and again to haul the wounded down to a casualty collection point. The Air Force Combat Controller Zachary Reiner stood in the open and called an airstrike after airstrike, wounded in the leg, still talking the aircraft onto targets just yards away. The gunfight burned for roughly 7 hours. The U.S. military estimated more than 150 insurgents were killed. And here is the part that defies belief. Not a single American died on that mountain. 10 men earned Valor awards for that one fight, the most Silver Stars awarded to a single unit in one battle since Vietnam, and over the years that followed, the action would ultimately produce 2 Medals of Honor for Schurer and Williams, and an Air Force Cross for Reiner. Real footage from helmet cameras and gun cameras shot that day still exists, and it remains some of the most harrowing combat ever recorded on video. Shok Valley was a team surviving together against impossible odds. The next story is the opposite one man, choosing to face the impossible alone. January 25th, 2008, Kunar Province, the Gowardesh Valley, the kind of place Afghan soldiers had tried and failed to take for years. They had a name for it, the Valley of Death. ODA 3312 pushed in before dawn on a combat reconnaissance patrol, hunting insurgent safe havens through nearly a foot of snow and brutal cold. On the way, the convoy had to stop twice to blow apart boulders the enemy had rolled into the road, a classic trick to funnel a patrol into a kill zone. The team knew exactly what that meant. They kept going anyway. At the front, on point, was the weapons sergeant, Staff Sergeant Robert Miller. He taught himself Pashto, and the Afghan soldiers trusted him completely. He led from the front always. They reached the objective, an empty compound, around 1 in the morning. Then a drone overhead spotted them. 15 to 20 insurgents across the river, moving into position to attack. Miller and a small element moved forward to get eyes on them. A figure stepped out from behind a boulder less than 20 meters away, shouted "God is great," and charged. Miller cut him down with a burst from his light machine gun. And in that instant, the whole valley came alive. It was 140 fighters, maybe more, dug into prepared positions on 3 sides of the patrol, opening fire from less than 25 meters away. One of Miller's commanders later described it as standing in the middle of a 4th of July fireworks show. The team was caught in the open with almost no cover. They were seconds from being overrun, so Miller did the one thing nobody expected. He told his men to fall back to cover, and then he charged forward, alone, straight at the enemy. He took a round to the torso early on. He moved from position to position, deliberately drawing the fire of more than 100 fighters onto himself, buying his team the seconds they needed to reach safety. He threw every grenade he had, fired every round he had. By the time it was over, he'd killed at least 10 enemy fighters and wounded dozens more, fighting on for around 25 minutes after the first bullet hit him. A second round struck his left side. This time the wound was mortal. Robert Miller died waited there in the snow. His stand saved the lives of 7 of his own teammates and 15 Afghan soldiers and broke the back of the ambush. The patrol killed roughly 40 of the attackers in those opening minutes alone. In 2010, his family received the Medal of Honor in his name. Robert Miller showed it on offense in the mountains. But sometimes the Taliban brought the fight to you and you had no warning at all. August 28, 2013, Forward Operating Base Ghazni, Eastern Afghanistan. A Special Forces team from 1st Special Forces Group had just finished taking a group photo, an ordinary moment. Seconds later, the whole base shook. The Taliban had driven a vehicle packed with 400 pounds of explosives into the perimeter wall and detonated it, tearing a 60-foot hole straight through. And before the dust had even settled, 10 attackers poured through the breach wearing stolen Afghan National Army uniforms and strapped into vests, carrying rifles, grenades, and grenade launchers. If they reached the densely populated part of the base, the death toll would have been catastrophic. Staff Sergeant Earl Plumley and 5 other soldiers grabbed 2 vehicles and drove toward the explosion. On the way in, a rocket-propelled grenade slammed into their truck. By some miracle, it didn't go off. Plumley threw his own body across the driver to shield him, then bailed out into the open and immediately engaged an insurgent about 15 meters away with his pistol because his rifle was out of the fight. Then he advanced, alone, on foot, with a handgun into a swarm of suicide bombers. He killed one with a grenade, killed another by putting a precise round into the man's vest and detonating it. He pushed forward again and engaged more of them at point-blank range, close enough that when one vest went off about 7 meters away, the blast picked Plumley up and threw him backward into a wall. He got up and kept fighting. He fell back, linked up with another soldier, and counterattacked again. In the chaos, a fellow Green Beret Staff Sergeant, Michael Alice, moved to protect a Polish officer and was killed when an attacker detonated his vest. Plumley braved the open ground again to reach the wounded, applied tourniquets under fire, and got them moved to the surgical team. One soldier who was there put it plainly, if they had arrived 10 seconds later, the insurgents would have been deep inside the base. They stopped the entire assault at the breach. And then came the strange part. Plumley was nominated for the Medal of Honor. Top commanders backed it, and the Army downgraded it to a Silver Star. It took years congressional pressure, an inspector general review, a fight that dragged on long after the gunsmoke cleared before the decision was finally reversed. In December 2021, 8 years after that morning at Ghazni, Earl Plumley received the Medal of Honor. The men in these stories survived a car bomb, a cliff, a frozen ambush. But the war didn't end in 2013, and the last fight is the one that reminds you what every single one of these missions risked. November 2nd, 2016, Kunduz Province, in the north, a village called Boz Qandahari. One of the men who fought there described it later as something like a castle. The target was intelligence that several high-level Taliban leaders were using the village as a safe haven to rest and refit. Afghan reporting named a senior local commander and his second-in-command believed to be meeting there. A 59-man force Afghan commandos and the Green Berets of ODAO 224, 10th Special Forces Group flew in by Chinook on a moonless night, landed in a flooded field and trudged nearly a mile through mud that came up to their waists to reach the edge of the village. They cleared the first 2 compounds without a shot, gathered intelligence, and got ready to move before bad weather closed in. And then the night exploded. It started with a single distinctive sound, the thud of a grenade. Then the entire village erupted, Taliban fighters opening up from nearly every direction at once. The blast wounded several Afghan soldiers and 2 Americans in the first moments. The team was suddenly fighting for survival in pitch darkness, surrounded inside a fortified maze with no easy way out. What followed was an all-night battle. Green Berets breached a massive metal gate under fire to reach trapped elements. They fought to recover their wounded and carry them out through a landing zone that was still hot while the enemy kept pressing in. Sergeant First Class Brian Seidel said he didn't know if the team had ever been hit that hard. By the time the sun came up on November 3rd and the last man was finally evacuated, the team had paid a price that still hangs over the men who were there. The commander, Major Andrew Byers, was killed. He died on the medevac flight out. So was the intelligence sergeant, Sergeant First Class Ryan Gloyer. Roughly a third of the 59-man force was wounded. According to U.S. accounts, 27 Taliban fighters and 3 Taliban commanders were killed in Boz Qandahari. The team's heroism that night earned 3 silver stars, multiple bronze stars for Valor, and a row of Purple Hearts. They had walked into a castle full of the enemy's leadership and fought until dawn, and they did not all come home. 5 missions. Different years, but the same kind of men going forward when everything in the human body screams to go back. Their stories are on the record, because the people who survived made sure they would be. If their stories meant something to you, the best thing you can do is make sure they keep getting told. Like the video, drop a comment, and subscribe so the next one reaches more people. Thank you for watching all the way to the end, and I'll see you on the next one.